Good morning. I'm Sue South, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm Senior Technical Specialist with ICF, which is an international management consulting firm. And I'd like to start by thanking Councilman Reverend Burgess and the leadership of ELDI for bringing us here, and also to thank, and I recognize in the audience, a number of people that gave very generously of their time and their insight to help inform this process. So I'm really pleased that you came this morning. I am not going to go through how you got where you are, because you've heard that from my colleagues and you've lived it. So I'd like to start by saying that we were invited here to provide both a response to the robust planning efforts that have already taken place so far, and to provide suggestions regarding the sequencing and financing of comprehensive neighborhood revitalization strategies for the East End in general and for Homewood in particular. We found multiple strengths in Homewood, which we believe can serve as a platform for revitalization strategies that would involve both physical development and attention to the socioeconomic conditions in the neighborhood. We found grassroots organizations and engaged residents, chief among those being Operation Better Block, which has recently undertaken a community-driven planning process to identify clusters of opportunities and potential development strategies for 9 residential nodes and the business district. They've amassed parcel-level data, which is critical to informing some early development decisions and to identify some early wins. The level of resident input in this process was extraordinary. And I spend a lot of time doing community planning and sustainable neighborhood development. So this is really, you've done something very special here that isn't done in very many places. And in the process have really touched, I think, virtually every household in Homewood. And their recommendations and their input need to be taken into consideration when identifying timing and neighborhood level interventions and improvements. That being said, the caution is that those resident wishes also have to be merged with and tempered with market realities and the current conditions within the context of East End, and these have to be factored into good decision making as well. We found some strategic locations in the neighborhood that could form a physical development, from a physical development perspective, could form an opportunity to leverage what's already there, creating new housing and small business opportunities. And again, these were identified by residents. Certainly the Homewood busway station and that transit-oriented development area around that creates potential demand. The caveat there is that the busway itself actually could be a physical barrier, particularly as it relates to the close-in business community in Homewood and its ability to access market and consumer opportunities from Shady Side, on the other side of the busway. There's also the potential development of a greenway between the neighborhood and downtown, which could provide both connectivity and a new residential amenity in the neighborhood. We think that revitalization of the commercial corridor of Homewood Avenue between Frankstown and the terminal is very important, and that really provides an opportunity again to support and attract more neighborhood-serving retail. And Carnegie Library and what I've nicknamed the Neighborhood Resources Hub, and you heard a little bit of the same theme with what AJ just said, I believe is a tremendous opportunity. What you have here is some very strong and long-term community organizations in a relatively compact geographic area. And here I'm thinking about Community Empowerment Association, Operation Better Block, Homewood Children's Village, Homewood House, and the Community College. They're easily accessed by much of the Homewood communities because of their central location. And it's also a place where these organizations are providing a variety of services that are really critical to the residents of the neighborhood. I also don't want to overlook other community institutions such as the YM and YWCA and the local churches because of the important role they play in youth development, in senior programming, and in providing supportive services for working families. We also have to talk about the weaknesses and threats, because really these will help to inform decision-making about what's doable and possible in both the short and the longer term. And again, these are things you've heard before: loss of the residential base, high rates of property tax delinquency, lower home ownership rates, deteriorating property conditions, lack of local markets to support local businesses, low-performing local non-magnet schools. You have some really strong magnet schools that are right in the East End area, and high rates of both violent and property crimes. And then the demolition of structures, which has resulted in both the loss of tax base and the ability of the city to sustain levels of public services to the neighbors, and also that creates large expanses of what's really non-productive land at this point. And ELDI was gracious enough to provide us with some data that really underscores the problem that we're talking about here. There's roughly, not quite 2,200 parcels in the Homewood neighborhoods. 60.7 of these are tax delinquent. 70% of them are vacant. And this is land. This doesn't include vacant structures. And about 38% of them are currently owned by governmental entity, either the city or the URA. And we think for these reasons, interventions both immediate and longer term must be done to prevent this historic neighborhood from total abandonment. There's a high percentage of current residents that are at risk of losing their homes to tax foreclosure, an alarming number. There is continuing social and economic isolation of the neighborhood from the resources and amenities of both the downtown and surrounding more stable neighborhoods. And this has really stifled the really strong efforts that the indigenous community leadership have made to revitalize the area on their own. We think this is due in part to lack of maybe an organization that's widely accepted by resident, governmental, and philanthropic leadership that has both, and this is important, the financial and the organizational capacity to undertake large, multifaceted development projects. In addition, access to resources that support asset building and social equity, while seemingly available in Pittsburgh overall, are perceived as being non-existent or non-responsive to Homewood residents and businesses. There also appears to be somewhat of a disconnect between available jobs in and near Homewood and the skills of the indigenous workforce. Now, we're going to talk about the opportunities, which is the good part. We see a number of exciting opportunities in Homewood. However, transformational change can only be achieved if organizational leadership, capacity, and resources can be identified. And I think that's critical, because in much of the neighborhood-based planning that's done, there's very high levels of excitement and community engagement, and you come up with a phenomenal plan, but at the end of the day, when the residents are ready to go, and the businesses are ready to go, and the indigenous leadership is ready to go, the resources aren't there. And that happens enough, and people just get discouraged. So this is what we don't want to happen here. But it's not going to happen overnight, as you all know. I think small success begets additional small success. Market and capacity are going to have to drive the physical development, as you've heard from all of my colleagues. The capital markets have to be comfortable and engaged. And expectations have got to be managed. It's going to take a while. It took a long time to get here. It's going to take a while for new things to happen. We see the HELP initiative as a means to coordinate resources and facilitate redevelopment. Our recommendations in this regard would be to build from your stronger edges, which is basically south and southwest, and in proximity to that busway transit stop that we talked about, as the OBB cluster plan suggests. We think there should be initial focus on increasing the stock of quality rental housing, with some limited for-sale development based on realistic absorption rates. We also think that it's important to identify markets for housing to be created that focus both on supporting existing residents and repopulating target neighborhoods. So started brainstorming some potential markets for bringing people back, and you all are going to know these better than we are, but some of the things that we kind of thought about were students and recent grads from local universities that think the city's a really cool place and may have that first entry-level job. We understand that there are a significant number of families that lived in this neighborhood but then moved out to the suburbs, and now they commute an hour a day to get to work, and so that's another potential market for you. In Detroit, alumni of local high schools have been a source of market opportunity to bring people back, because there's a real emotional connection in Detroit, and I understand here as well, to the high school you went to. And that there are active alumni associations in a number of your local high schools. And finally, the congregants of the local churches. We would also, and this is a little bit different take, and it's actually an idea that bubbled up from you all, people that we talk to here, is that we think it's critical that elected leadership, the foundation community, the faith-based community, and the anchor institutions, and by that I mean your universities, your medical centers, and your hospitals, come together to create systems change in a coordinated effort to address the social equity issues in the neighborhood and support working families. The circles model on steroids might be an interesting way to think about doing this, but again, it's really important. People have to be brought along so that they partake in whatever additional economic opportunities are created. To get a little bit more specific on things that could happen, and there'll be much more detail on these in our report, we think there are a number of objectives that should be addressed to ensure that Homewood remains both a viable neighborhood and really becomes a neighborhood of choice for new residents. And the first, and to me the most important, is to stabilize the existing homeownership base and protect and support the remaining homeowners so that they can stay in the neighborhood, while at the same time providing homeownership opportunities to those that want to move to Homewood. Very briefly, you've heard from my colleagues, some kind of a tax amnesty program, discounted free title clearance services, owner-occupied home repair programs, home buyer assistance, just some examples. Secondly, we think there should be programs focused on improving the existing rental stock, strategic code enforcement of problematic properties, access to low-interest loans for rental repairs, and property management training for landlords, which may seem weird, but you have a lot of mom-and-pop landlords in the area, and any of my colleagues who do real estate development are going to tell you that property management is no easy thing, and to be good at it and to get good tenants and retain those tenants takes a little bit of education and some support. The third is we think it's critical to support programs that create opportunities and additional supports for small and minority businesses. And that's a picture of one you actually have now in your neighborhood, but business mentoring, business development, grants and low interest loans, low cost incubator space, and anchor institution vending opportunities, which is sometimes a little bit difficult, but for example in Detroit was somewhat not enormously successful, but moderately successful. These institutions buy billions of dollars of goods and services every year. And their first and second tier vendors should be encouraged to look locally for that purchasing. Fourth would be workforce programming, training, summer youth employment. And last, I think you have to improve the safety of the neighborhood for residents and businesses. It's really critical to making sure that you become a really desirable neighborhood of choice for both the people who live here and people who are visiting. Reducing the incidence of crime through identification and removal of opportunity. We think that the model that EDLI is using to depopulate multifamily buildings that have become neighborhood crime hotspots is really innovative and a tremendously good idea. We also think that crime reduction initiatives such as community policing and Cop on the Block, along with other neighborhood level strategies, should be considered.